Manage till 8:30 before we all fade? Yeah. So this is a chance to ask him, or just the group, put into the group, anything that you're... Because we are not recording your voices. And so by my repeating the question, it allows the recording to offer the question. I'm going to do my best. So you were referring to what Charlie said on day one about the having self, the doing self, and the old self, right? And you're particularly interested in the old self relative to memory and seeds of things that might be stuck in the memory that might be causing a reaction, a repeated reaction of some sort, right, Charlie?
I think the soul in its original state, and as we were discussing this morning, was free, had no dependence, even on the body. But when we sort of lose our spiritual power, many forms of dependence come. And once we were having a discussion amongst friends on the spiritual journey, because we all know how deep our attachment is to this temporary form and why we have a whole lot of issues around health and death and so on. But we were even feeling that the identity with my story, the attachment to my story is even deeper sometimes. And as I was, I think, alluding to, I once read that some believe in psychology, they say 70% of our thinking is about the past, going over and over and over the past. In a sense, when I really have the realization I'm a soul, it's almost like I also begin to see that story is not my real story. It's just the story of this particular lifetime. And the more I become soul conscious, it's a realization that a lot of my actions were under the influence of my old self, an ignorant self, if I can say, under the influence of my ego and my dependence and a whole lot of emotions I had, other people had, the give and take of sorrow and hurt, this sort of thing. But now I have a sense of my permanent identity. Rather than identify with it, I become more of a detached observer of it. Actually, I was having a lovely chat to Roberto over dinner. And, my feeling that detachment is an extraordinary state of wisdom if detachment is interpreted properly. To me, detachment is to be very loving, very caring, very close, but uninfluenced by. And I feel for the scenes of life, we need to be a detached observer. For other people, a benevolent observer. And for the self, an honest observer. So I begin to honestly look that this was an old story and I have now a new story. I now can see why I was under the influence of certain things, but still I feel in saying that some memories are very powerful, very hurtful. But I do think that the more those fundamental two things, that I am practicing who I am and I feel the love of God, that can clear the account, because the more I think about those stories, I increase the account in my story. The more I become detached, I let go their influence. It's not that I'll forget them, but they don't cause sorrow. Actually, just recently in Australia, I was talking to a man who actually was the foreign minister of the country. And he said to me, sometimes I think of things I've done and I go, oh, he said, I even say it out loud. How could have I done that? And we were talking about, these regrets that we have about our own behavior. So I think that it takes time, but it's like, I think the long-term journey of spiritual life is settling the account, is settling my account with, people, my past, this sort of thing. So still remember it, but it doesn't cause me hurt or pain when I remember those scenes of life. Yeah.
You lovingly destroy something, or put another way, can destruction be a loving process, right?
I think it can, in the sense, maybe destroy is a strong word, but ultimately the spiritual journey is destroying my ego, dying from ego. And I think it's love that really dissolves ego. I think ultimately there's a deep relationship between love and ego. It seems the more ego I have, the less love I really experience in life. And really, I think the more I experience love from God, the ultimate act of love is to surrender the attachment to this temporary identity. I really sacrifice my ego, but that's, sometimes in the BK language we talk about dying alive, dying from an old identity, destroying an old identity, and it's love that really is the power that can destroy. So in that sense, I think, I don't know whether anyone else wants to add something.
I thought she might want to talk about the moth and the flame, but no, she doesn't. Okay. Michael.
Sorry.
Okay, so I've never understood really the settling a karmic account. What does that mean, and how does that happen?
Sometimes I think, just a beginning point, that, when you wake up in the morning sometimes and life's okay, but you just don't feel happy, you feel empty, you feel sort of nothing. That's almost the unfinished business of my karmic story that's sort of sitting inside the soul. And in a way, the whole long-term aim of meditation is to, we say settle the karmic account, but remove myself from the influence of my past. That's fundamentally what I'm doing. And you know how often today, in relationships, relationships go through such cycles. I often think that relationships can be like an iceberg. Not that they're cold, but 10% above and 90% below. You see the 10% and you think, oh, I like that, that looks good. And as you get to know, the 90% start to emerge and you start to feel, oh, I'm not sure about this. And we often, if someone gives me sorrow, I give sorrow back, because we just play this game of give and take of sorrow, so we increase an account. But when I have wisdom in a relationship with God, I can choose not to buy into the account, even if another individual wants to create an account with me, is fighting with me, disapproving. But I can listen to them and I can respect them, but I don't have to create an account. And sometimes in a conflict, 90% is on one side. It's not 50-50. One person, one party may suffer 90%, the other party only a small amount, even nothing sometimes. Maybe they're just not getting it, that's the case. But ultimately, I think with knowledge of who I am, the knowledge of God, the knowledge of time, I start to step back from the influence of my past. And in a sense, that's the settlement of the account. And what's happened in the past, I don't identify with it. I'm now living more in the present. And I would say for me in my practice, if someone says to me, how have you felt? One thing I found, in the past things would affect me a lot, like opinions, situations, things going wrong. I feel it less and less and less. I feel lighter and lighter. And in a sense, I feel that's the old story going. mainly the closer I feel to God, the more I remember God, the less I feel my past is like the shadow dictating my behavior and thinking in the present. But it's been a slow process, I would say. So it's, in a sense, it's like freeing myself from my own story, setting myself out of the jail, the prison of my own past actions, you know. And even things that I've maybe regretted or felt guilty about. You know, I feel we either apologize to people if we feel I've done something wrong, clear it. We try to do that. But then I also learn the art of forgiving myself as well, which is, I think, one of the most powerful things in a relationship with God. That, you know, not to keep punishing myself, which I think we've been pretty good at for a long time, self-punishment. But the whole philosophy of karma is an absolutely fascinating philosophy on an individual thing, on a group thing, on a family thing, on a country level, on a religious level. There's layers and layers. It's just an absolutely fascinating philosophy, I find. The deeper we go into it, the more we have an understanding. And in a sense, one way of looking this time is the accumulation of all our karmic stories that's making this world as it is, all these incredibly sort of powerful energies in the world at the moment.
Such a dummy. All right. I'm going to try again.
Thank you, Judy.
You're welcome. Said with a lot of love. Okay, so I think this question has to do with the influence of past life on the current life, right? And how sometimes when we're in a moment, we may feel we recognize the moment, or we may wonder if this life is finishing a past life or resolving a past life, something like that. So what is your take, Charlie, on the influence of past life on your current life?
You know, I've always had this understanding, actually, and to me it helps us really understand so much about our lives personally and what's happening in our world, because the soul carries its story forward. Everything that happens, it's like, what is the process of consciousness? The mind receives information from the sense organs. So what I see and hear is thrown up on the screen of the mind. The intellect assesses the information, makes a decision, and does an action. And every action is recorded in my subconscious. All of us sitting here, who am I really? The accumulation of every one of my past actions that bring me to this room in the present. So past lives, you know, I've talked to many women with children, for instance. I remember one woman telling me that she had 4 children. 3 of them were really fine. One from the moment of birth was not a happy camper at all. And she said, same parents, same everything. Completely different personalities. I had another woman say that, like in the country like Australia, they teach kids to swim before they walk because everything's on the beaches. You know, people live and you have to learn to swim. She said 2 or 3 of her kids just took to water like a duck, like most kids. One had panic attacks. And it's some experience. What that experience was, we can't say. But all of us, fear is a great indicator of our past life story. But on the other hand, once I was in Cambridge, I think it was, in the UK, and there was one of the BKs there who's a concert pianist, beautiful piano player. And he took me to a hall, if I remember correctly, some of you may correct me, where Mozart was playing his own music, touring Europe at the age of 10 or 11, something like that. And actually I read a book years and years ago, a theory that the great composers of Europe are the same 4 or 5 souls taking birth and rebirth. because most of them, even when they were young, were they could play they could just play. For instance, there's a musician in Australia who's a trumpet player who opened the Sydney Olympics. And I once was talking to him. He's a phenomenal player, goes all over the world. He said, I've never had a lesson. I've never had one lesson in my life. He's a world famous. So we carry forward tendencies in arts and attractions to cultures and things, to philosophy. All of this programming comes out in certain ways. We're very much influenced by our family of this life. Yet, many times I've met with parents who, parents who just adore their kids. And, one or two are fine, but one is really challenged. And what I often feel is that there's two huge influences on a child. One is the family, the love, the belonging, the care. But second is the karmic story they carry. And sometimes that's even more powerful than the love in the family. No matter what, and then parents blame themselves if the child feels unhappy or can't adjust to anything much. The parents often blame themselves, but really that soul is carrying its story from the past. And sometimes the stories can be shifted, but they can be very, very powerful, very, very powerful stories. So in the whole understanding of what has brought me to this point, past lives are fascinating. We don't go into the detail of it, but just the knowledge that I have lived many times, and that's why I accumulate likes and dislikes and tendencies. Some people, even for me as a child, I really disliked eating meat. Why? Why was that? My brother and sister weren't like that. Why was I like that? Because you carry tendencies, likes, and a whole lot of things. I'm just, talking about the essence in a way. And talking about the law of karma too. Once I was in Chicago a long time ago, and a funny thing, I just was there for 2 days, and the person who was running our meditation center had applied for tickets for the Oprah Winfrey show. And the day I arrived there, it was Halloween, was the tickets arrived. So they took me along to the Oprah Winfrey show. And, they, because they had this, they announced, today, for the first time, Oprah's going to talk about reincarnation. And it was really interesting because there was a family, no, not a family, a group of people who had all these ups and downs in their relationships. And one of them became so disturbed she went to a hypnotherapist. And their understanding was they had lived together, in America a few 100 years ago or something. And a lot of what happened then was playing out now. And they were pretty, how can I say, simple people. It was an incredibly powerful story. And one thing I remember about that so while they were getting a satellite feed and it wasn't really working, and so they started to say, where's everyone from? And everyone was from different states in America, California, Idaho, this, that, came to me and they said, I'm from Australia. They said, do you watch the show? I'd never seen it, and I said, yes. So I told a lie in front of them. So please forgive me. How could I say no? Because it was like 1991 or something in Australia. Oprah Winfrey wasn't a big deal then. But it was a really fascinating, and obviously Oprah Winfrey herself absolutely connected with reincarnation and the story of the soul. Yes, that's a huge thing, and perhaps...
Why you're so sleepy. All right. So, Charlie, you're encouraging us to let go of stories of the past, but you're also encouraging us to remember. So how do you reconcile this business of forgetting stories of the past and also remembering. What are we remembering?
You know, one of my experiences recently in different countries is that the yearning to meditate is so powerful in a lot of people. The yearning for peace of mind. But a lot of people have an impression that have this idea that meditation is sort of elevating, you're taking yourself into a completely different zone. So a lot of people feel subtly, I'm a bit of a failure at meditation. In fact, I've met many people recently who've been to 10-day silence retreats and things and really tried and really feel. And when you sort of feel you're a bit of a failure, obviously you can't move forward. It's something I love about the Brahma Kumaris because the most natural part of my intellect is to remember. At every single millisecond, I am remembering. So I'm using what's natural towards God. And the sort of the idea, in a split second, in no time, 3 things happen. You connect, and whatever you connect with you influences you, and whatever influences you creates the feeling. So if you're sitting here at this moment, even as I'm speaking, you travel to another country, another state, you remember a family member you're close to, there's a good relationship. The instant you connect, you're influenced by that love and you feel relaxed, easy. But in the next second, you can remember a family member you're in conflict with, it's not working well at all. The instant the subtle thread touches that tension, that stress, that anxiety, that anger, and that's your feeling. So in a sense, whatever the subtle thread is touching is dictating how I'm feeling inside. And I would say at the heart and soul of the practice of the Brahma Kumaris is to live my life, look after my family, do my work, contribute to society, but remember God. And the whole way means, and this is the karmic thing, that where your karmic accounts lie is like a magnet for your remembering. You know, there's a situation which makes you unhappy. You know it makes you unhappy, but you can't stop yourself thinking about it. It's like a magnet. So that means that you're under the influence of your past karmic story. The more I have the power to connect with God, those karmic stories have less power over me. And that's why our aim is really to live in this world, contribute, not withdraw, but remember. And that's why we meditate with eyes open too, so that you can have this connection at all moments in your life. You just go about your life, keeping the connection. And there was one lovely thing that was said to one of the older sisters, the daddies, and that, we're busy people, right? Everyone here is busy. But what was said to her was, many drops make an ocean. The drops of remembrance build up a power, a spiritual power within yourself. And it was my main practice during COVID, was to really build up remembering, connecting with God. And what I really began to realize is that when you have a conversation with somebody and you walk away, you analyze it, you process it. We are constantly analyzing and processing, which we have to do. But sometimes that consumes me. And if you, in between, when you walk to the dining room, or when you walk to your room, or if you remember, connect, it's like you build spiritual power into your life. And the more you have the connection, the less all the karmic things of life and the situations have power over you. So it's like you're taking back your spiritual power, and you're not coming under the influence of opinions and behaviors and all the stuff of life that often dominates our thinking. And really, I feel that's at the heart of our practice here, is just to, I, the soul, as I go about my life, remember God in all different relationships in many different ways. So remembering is personally, I feel if you think rather than I'm meditating, I'm remembering, it's actually, there's less pressure. It sort of seems more natural. And I'm a great believer that I feel that true spirituality should be very natural. And I feel that the first step on the journey is to fall in love with God. And if you fall in love, you will naturally remember. You don't have to think, I should remember. It's a natural consequence. And when you naturally remember one who's pure, shall we say, egoless, viceless, what do I become? That's the main influence on my life. So there's a natural change that begins to happen.
One of these has to do with identifying where are we remembering God. So what's the description, or how would you describe where you're remembering God?
I thought you were going to do the second one as well.
Do you want them together?
No,
you want both questions?
No, thanks. I am a soul, and at the moment I sit in a human form in a material world. And they often call this material world is made up of the 5 elements of matter. So I, the soul, I love Shakespeare's view on it, that the world is a stage and we're actors on the stage. We're all like, I'm a soul, and this is the stage. The sun, moon, and stars are the lights of the stage. Because the 6th element is the element of light, a non-material element, where God resides in all human souls, as I understand. So the human souls come onto the stage and play their part. But God, the home of God and the home of the human soul is the element of light. And a non-material element, so to speak. So we remember the Supreme Soul is in that home. Yeah.
Okay, second question. There is the phenomenon of karma.
For our karma, and no human soul, even God, can interfere. But God can teach me how to do a quality of karma that creates happiness, because my sense, if God interferes in my karma, why doesn't he interfere and help somebody else too? Is grace for everybody or for some? Because I think God is totally egalitarian in that sense, totally fair. And in a sense, personally, I don't think God can settle anyone's karmic account, but can teach us how to do actions and how to remember him to free myself from my karmic story. I don't know whether that makes sense. But so it's like I put myself under the influence of...
Okay, now Sister Gayatri would like to respond to this question.
They keep asking, so let me just say anything and confuse you now. I'll speak from my personal experiences rather than give you a general answer. I believe, or I feel, that there are layers of characteristics, sanskaras in the soul that are not necessarily all bad. So when we use this word karma, it shouldn't be interpreted as something bad. Karma is a neutral term. And depending on the consciousness with which you do something, and this is what we've been talking about, awareness, consciousness you're in, the awareness that emerges from that, the attitude, the vision, the action, and then the world. Depending on your consciousness and the resulting action that emerges from this spiritual trajectory, it's then determined by the sanskaras, or the trait that gets imprinted on the soul. Because remember, this law of karma is an absolute law. It's one of the laws that spiritually is absolute. Every action carries a consequence. There's a cause and there's a consequence. And this word justice is actually embedded in this absolute law of karma. And so everyone is then accountable for what they do, but good and bad, not just bad. And so I just wanted to make that clarification. So from a spiritual perspective, for me, because I'm aware that this is a time of benevolence, that I have access to wisdom, to knowledge, to a deeper understanding of how this thing called life, soul, operates, what it constitutes. So I look for shortcuts, right? And one of the shortcuts to dealing with karma, for me, is not so much looking at the settlement of what I have done in the past. So the story, okay, I've done the story, I've done the action, but do I have to be chained to those actions? Do I have to be regurgitating the same story of the past? Or is there a shortcut to something I can create? Is the present providing me with an opportunity for me to create something new? And that's how I see karma. It's an opportunity to create something that liberates me from my ignorance and puts me in the driving seat of creating a destiny that I want for myself. And that's how I see it. Now, in order to do that, this is where the teachings, the spiritual, like the law, the philosophy of karma, I need to understand it and to apply it to what I'm doing. Not just understand it and then become the victim of the understanding, but to understand it and apply it to my life in order to liberate me from doing actions that will put me in bondage. So for me, this is what karma does. You either are in the bondage of the karma or you're liberated. So you live a liberated life. So I just wanted to add that in, of karma being an opportunity to create fortune in our lives. And the second thing I wanted to comment on, now that you've given me the mic, Judy will be grabbing it from me in a moment, is the question of thought, because I thought was a very interesting question, that we are told to forget the story of the past, but then we're told to remember. And for me, that's interesting because I'm told to remember my original self. I'm told to remember my authentic self. I'm told to remember my true self. And in so doing, I will shed the shackles of a story that I created in ignorance of that authentic self. So when I'm remembering and forgetting, because this is the game, I'm remembering with a forward-looking vision. I'm moving forward when I remember my authentic self. I move backwards when I remember my acquired self. And the problem that we face as human beings is that when we remember even the past, we may have done beautiful things, even in the dark ages of our immediate past, but we don't tend to remember those. We remember the bad things. And the bad things consume us. And we tend to think, what is this authentic self? What is this true self? What is this original self? Because all I can remember are the things that hurt me, that give me pain. But yet we're forgetting the beautiful parts of things that are lying within us, even in the dark ages. So I feel this whole thing of remembering, when we remember, can we give ourselves the permission, because I think it's a kind of a permission, to remember the beautiful things of life and to generate more of those in the present. So I just wanted to add that. I know a third one I wanted to think. And I like the question of, is there love in destroying? And I think there is love in destroying. And I'll just tell a little story. My grandmother had a fireside, we call it a fireside, in which she used to burn, you know, in those, oh gosh, I might give up how old I am. But I come from a generation in which your grandmother used to cook on these earthenware stoves. They would call them the firesides. And what she did is that the things that she would burn, you would say destroying, she used to take them at night, the ashes, and she used to use them to clean pots the next day. And that which was burned, that was used to clean the pots, cleaned it better than any detergent that we have today. And yet it was natural, it was organic, it was going back into the earth. So I think it's the same, that the love with which we burn the impurities or the vices in the soul, we are transforming that back to, so if you burn anger, if you get rid of anger through the process of meditation, through the process of purification, what is emerging from, the phoenix is emerging from the ashes then. It's something that makes you, and that's an act of love. Purification is an act of love, and it involves destroying that which is limiting, that which is destructive. And I think it's really the highest form of love. And that is why I suppose one of the highest relationships you could have with God is God as the purifier. Because God purifies a lot of the things that we cannot do for ourselves. And in that purification, we emerge like the phoenix, and we don't have to bother with too much of the settlement of the karmas, because he's saying, look, leave that behind. Forget your past. You just do what I'm telling you to do. But we don't want to, because somehow the past is more powerful than the present. And we're being pulled by that past. So, but if we stay with what we're being told to do, and do it as an act of love for ourselves and for the world and for our relationships, I think we would take the shortcut in many of the things that we're finding a struggle in our lives now.
Come in which those around you are affected, maybe more than you're affected. And so, but you feel what's going on for them. And so what is yours to do, and what is yours not to do? Especially regarding family, children especially perhaps, spouses, children, family of all sorts, siblings. Yeah. So tight community, tight-knit community and family. So we're affected by what happens to those around us, and we want to do something, but we wonder what is ours to do and what is ours to leave alone and not do.
Sometimes I feel there's emotional support and spiritual support. And sometimes with all the best intent, giving support, you feel quite drained yourself. And, how sometimes you spend a lot of time to support people you love, and they feel better, and then tomorrow they come back in the same state. I could hear a lot of people saying, and they're just back to square one, and it's just this. What I learned a lot from the elder sisters of the Brahmakumaris, the daddies, they gave spiritual support. What that means is they see your higher self. They see who you really are, and they hold that in their attitude. And just your attitude, your vision, gives them strength in a sense that you're sort of helping to empower them to solve their own stuff. And just by knowing their value and having this, rather than sort of thinking, oh, God, what's wrong with you? Can't you sort of get your act together? That sort of thing, that you hold that value. A part of spiritual support, which I've seen too, is that you are very loving, caring, close, but totally detached. And detachment is such a good thing, actually, but it's the most misunderstood of all virtues, because in English it is often interpreted as being very aloof, not caring. But it fundamentally means you're not influenced. And I think when you're in your self-respect as a soul, you have that connection with God, you can be that detached and loving. You can give that spiritual support. So your presence is like a support. You don't get caught in their emotions, caught in their story. You know how people, oh, did you hear what happened? You know, they get really caught up in the drama of life. Whereas rather than absorbing life, we observe life here. You know, we learn to watch it. So, you know, I think it's a natural consequence when the soul conscious practice gets deeper. And interestingly, the more you're detached, the more you can support those you love. And you don't feel so affected and drained and exhausted by it all. Sometimes I think, you know, who's the most loving of all? It's God. But who's the most detached of all? It's God. God's remembered for his love, but he's the most detached as well. So it just shows you, detachment increases your capacity to love, because you're not so affected by the stuff going on. A one? You know what I feel? You do it. Children don't learn from what you say, but if they see who you are. The amazing thing about the Brahma Kumari is the biggest community are mothers. The mothers are the strength of this organisation, without a doubt. And mothers often say, how can I teach my children? And I always say, when you do it, children learn from who you are, not what you say so much. And my own sister used to tell me that she just said that her connection with her two sons was so strong, she could notice when her stuff, she was going up and down emotionally, it transmitted almost to the children. And so, you know, the more that she worked on herself, it was automatically benefiting. So I feel for children especially, the more you practice yourself, it's an incredible gift, and especially self-respect. It's the big issue for everyone, but especially young people. And if you live in self-respect, that'll be the gift, the greatest gift you can give to a child, that they have their own sense of their own value in life. That makes life easy. When there's lack of self-respect, everything's very challenging.
Such a nice question to end on, isn't it?